The red and blue lights were painting my quiet suburban street like a crime scene at 2:47 a.m. 5 police cruisers had my house surrounded, officers crouched behind doors with hands on their guns, all because I dared to pack a few moving boxes. And the woman responsible for calling in the cavalry? Victoria Langford, our HOA president, who had decided that in Maple Grove Estates, no one escapes her kingdom without her royal approval. But Victoria had no idea the deputy stepping out of that last cruiser was my own son Ryan. None of it happened overnight, of course. It was a slow, 6-week siege that started with the innocent thud of a hammer driving a for sale sign into the lawn my late husband Michael had mowed every Sunday like it was his religion. The sign stood there for exactly 4 minutes before she materialized across the street, emerging from her McMansion like a Botoxed specter summoned by the scent of rebellion. "Emily, darling," she cooed, voice dripping with that fake honey she reserved for problem residents. Her Lululemon set was so perfectly pressed, it looked bulletproof. "A for sale sign? How spontaneous. Have you considered how this disrupts the visual harmony we've all sacrificed so much to maintain? For the greater good, naturally." She tilted her head, eyes scanning my porch like she was appraising a used car. "I do hope you've read Section 7.2 of the Covenants regarding property disposition. It's quite clear about preserving the aesthetic integrity of the community." I forced a smile that hurt my face. "Just trying to move on after Michael, Victoria. The market's good." She made that little toot-tang sound, the one that said she was already calculating how many violations she could invent before lunch. "Change can be so messy here in Maple Grove. We wouldn't want just anyone moving in and lowering our collective standards, would we?" Then she glided away on silent sneakers, leaving behind the faint smell of expensive perfume and unspoken threats. That night, the first orange envelope appeared on my door like a ransom note. $500 for non-compliant memorial pebbles in the tiny garden I'd built beside the rose bushes Michael planted our first spring here. The pebbles had sat there unchanged for 3 years, gray river stones I'd chosen because they matched the color of his eyes when he laughed. Now they were suddenly an aesthetic felony. I paid it. Quietly. Because that's what you do when you're a grieving widow who just wants to sell and leave the ghosts behind. The next 2 weeks were psychological warfare dressed up as neighborly concern. My realtor scheduled an open house. The first couple arrived smiling, the wife already picturing her future kids chasing each other through the backyard. Then Victoria decided it was the perfect moment to fire up a commercial-grade leaf blower directly on the property line, wearing full PPE like she was decontaminating a biohazard zone. "Just maintaining standards," she yelled over the roar, waving cheerfully while the buyers flinched. The opera music started the second they stepped into the backyard, some tragic aria blasting from her open window at volumes that rattled my teeth. They left fast, muttering about noisy neighbors. By the third showing, she'd accidentally activated her sprinklers in a perfect arc that soaked an elderly couple on my walkway. During the fourth, a one-sided screaming match echoed from her backyard that sounded suspiciously rehearsed. My realtor was livid. "This is tortious interference, Emily. We can sue." I just shook my head. "Let's keep trying." But inside I was simmering. Every night, I'd catch the glint of binoculars from her upstairs window. Every morning, my trash cans were mysteriously misaligned by 3 millimeters. Another $250 violation notice, because apparently the bylaws required military precision curb appeal for the greater good. I started sleeping with the lights on. The house that once felt like home now felt like a cage with perfect landscaping. That's when I ran into Sofia Ramirez in the produce aisle. She used to live 2 doors down. The moment she saw me, she glanced around like we were in a spy movie. "Emily, I saw your sign. Be careful with Victoria. The rules are never about the rules." Over coffee, she spilled everything. How Victoria had run the HOA board like a mafia don, awarding contracts to her sister's shell company at 40% markup. How she'd harassed 3 other families into selling cheap, always to the same anonymous LLC. She came after my home bakery with fake health complaints. Ruined me in 6 weeks. We sold at a loss to her sister's company. Then I dug the LLC traces back to Victoria's brother-in-law. But my house was different, Sophia said. Victoria had tried to get the HOA to buy it years ago for some nonsense community green space. There was an old story about a business partner who vanished right before the previous owners sold in a panic. She's not just a bully, Emily. She's protecting something buried. Literally. I called Ryan that night. My son, the deputy 2 counties over. When I laid it all out, financials, harassment, the vanished partner, his cop voice went flat. Mom, this is bigger than HOA nonsense. 2 days later, he was on administrative leave. Victoria had filed an anonymous complaint claiming he was using his badge to intimidate a private citizen. She'd seen his cruiser. She was panicking. And desperate people make mistakes. So we gave her the mistake she feared most. I submitted a formal architectural request for a Michael Memorial Garden, requiring 6-foot-deep excavation for a stone patio and water feature. I dropped it in the HOA box myself and watched from my window as Victoria's perfect mask cracked. She paced her driveway on her phone for hours. A strange landscaping crew showed up at her place. She walked the property line with a hard-hatted guy pointing frantically at my yard like it was about to explode. The night before the fictional diggers were scheduled, Ryan slipped in after dark with a tiny motion-activated camera no bigger than a deck of cards. We hid it in the overgrown hedge with a perfect view of both porches. She'll crack, he whispered. Desperate people always do. At 2:17 a.m. the crash came, glass shattering like a gunshot. Then the scream. Pure theater. Within minutes the street was chaos, sirens, spotlights, officers shouting for me to come out with hands up. I stepped onto the porch, heart hammering, hands raised. Across the street Victoria stood wrapped in silk, towel pressed to her forehead, sobbing hysterically. That's her. She threatened me. She broke my window and said she'd shut me up for good. The lead sergeant started advancing on me. Then Ryan's truck pulled up. He stepped out calm as Sunday morning, badge out. Sergeant, Deputy Ryan Thompson. Hold position. He showed his phone. The sergeant's face changed from hard to stunned. Officers lowered their weapons. Ryan walked straight to Victoria, voice ice cold. Evidence, Victoria. High-def footage of you throwing that brick from inside your own house, then waiting 5 full seconds before the Oscar performance. Her face went the color of old oatmeal. The victim mask shattered into pure venom. You can't prove. The cuffs clicked. Victoria Langford, you're under arrest for filing a false police report and making false statements to law enforcement. The street exhaled. Neighbors who'd lived in fear for years stepped onto their porches like they'd been released from prison. The forensics team arrived at dawn. They didn't dig randomly. Ryan had fed them Sophia's intel, and they zeroed in on the overgrown flower bed under the old oak. Michael had always joked the soil there felt wrong. 2 hours in, one tech brushed dirt from a metal box the size of a shoebox, rusted and heavy. They pried it open on a folding table right there in my yard. Inside was a time capsule of crime. 2 sets of ledgers, one clean for show, one showing tens of thousands siphoned from HOA accounts into an offshore shell. A tear-stained confession from Victoria's old business partner admitting to everything in shaky handwriting that screamed coercion. And at the bottom, his wallet, driver's license, faded family photos, and a thin silver ring engraved with initials that matched the man who supposedly left town 20 years ago right before the previous owners sold in a hurry. Victoria hadn't just embezzled. She'd ruined him, blackmailed him, forced him to sign away his life, then buried the proof under the one property she could never let leave the neighborhood. My for sale sign had been a direct threat to her entire empire of lies. The ripple hit fast. Ryan's IA complaint vanished with an apology and his badge restored, plus a commendation for uncovering the Langford case. The news tore through Maple Grove like wildfire. People who'd crossed the street to avoid eye contact started knocking on my door with casseroles and apologies. Victoria's trial was swift. 12 years, no parole. The old HOA board resigned in disgrace. Sofia Ramirez ran unopposed and won president in a landslide. Her first act? A community barbecue where we publicly shredded half of Victoria's ridiculous rule book in a leaf blower-powered confetti cannon. Overnight, the neighborhood breathed. Kids played in front yards again. Gardens bloomed in colors that weren't on any approved palette. The fear was gone. I took the for sale sign down that same week. The house didn't feel like a museum of grief anymore. Facing Victoria's darkness had somehow cleansed the place. It was mine now, fought for, won back. I started building the real Michael Memorial Garden. Not the fake one from the proposal, but something honest. The first load of flagstones arrived, and my neighbor from 3 doors down showed up with his wheelbarrow unasked. "Heard you could use a hand," he said gruffly. By the end of the week, half the block was there. We filled the hole where the box had been and built a beautiful stone bench right on that spot. New roses went in. Fresh sod. A little bubbling fountain whose gentle sound finally replaced the memory of sirens. Ryan came by every Sunday. We'd sit on the new bench with coffee, watching the garden grow. One sunny afternoon, he turned to me. "Mom, Dad would have loved this. All of it." I looked around at the thriving flowers, sunlight dappling through the oak, and realized what Michael always said was true. What you plant is what you harvest. Victoria had planted fear and secrets. She harvested a prison cell. We'd been left with a hole in the ground, and together we grew peace. But here's the part that still keeps me up some nights. The neighbors who finally spoke up after Victoria's arrest all said the same thing. "We saw what she was doing to you, we just didn't want to be next." They'd watched her destroy lives for a decade and stayed silent because the rules looked so reasonable on paper. "For the greater good," she'd always say with that smile. Turns out the greater good was just code for whatever keeps Victoria in power. I keep that rusty lockbox photo on my phone as a reminder. Not of what she buried, but of what silence lets grow in the dark. The community green space she'd tried to force the HOA to buy my lot for. Turns out it was going to be a memorial to the partner she erased, right on top of his secrets. Poetic, in a sick way. Now when new families move in, we throw them a welcome party instead of a violation notice. Kids ride bikes without fear of non-compliant toy storage fines. Front porches have flags and wind chimes and actual personality. The atmosphere feels lighter, like someone finally opened all the windows after years of stale air. I still catch myself glancing at Victoria's old house sometimes. It's sold at auction, ironically, for way below market because nobody wanted the cursed address. The new owners ripped out her pristine lawn and planted wildflowers. Good for them. Sitting here on the stone bench Ryan and I built, watching the fountain bubble and the roses Michael planted finally bloom without apology, I feel something I haven't felt in years, free. Not just from the house, but from the invisible chains of community standards that were really just one woman's fear of exposure. So tell me, was I wrong for fighting dirty with a hidden camera and a fake excavation plan? Or was Victoria Langford the real criminal who deserved every second of her empire crumbling because she buried her sins under HOA rules while terrorizing everyone else? You decide. Who was truly in the wrong here? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one.